Our equality in the world, the equality of the black peoples of the world, is not built on any biblical fantasy or any liberal sentiment. It is rooted in hard, concrete, historical realities.
History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells of people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important, history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. The relationship of history to the people is the same as the relationship of a mother people to her child. That we were older than slavery, older than oppression, older than Europe. Now the scramble began for more information in the background of the African people of the world. And they had a preconceived notion of us that had nothing to do with our reality. And these African communal societies, where each got according to his needs, were not copied from Europe because they existed before there was a Europe. In these societies, based on the concept of the family and the community, everyone in the society had a responsibility. And in these societies, there was no word for jail because no one had ever gone to one. No word for orphanage because no one had ever thrown away any children. No word for old people's home because no one had ever thrown away grandma and grandpa. And while I had some admiration for the conclusion of Karl Marx, I dare to say he was a political opportunist and a Johnny-come-lately because he was rehashing something that was in the world before the first European wore a shoe or lived in a house that had where Arthur Schomburg was holding down the desk. Son. What you're calling African history and Negro history are the missing pages of world history. Then he said, son, go study the history of your masters. Go study the history of the people who enslaved you and find out why they found it a necessity to remove an entire people from the respectful commentary of the history of the world. Well, my earliest impressions of them was a people in power who intended to stay in power. And I began to wonder why they had so much and other people had so little, and why everybody I knew worked harder than they. Who made this arrangement? I studied European history and world history. Now, when I went back to Schomburg with some knowledge of background of European history, now he began to show me how to study African history. Arthur Schomburg taught me the interrelationship of African history to world history. Willis N. Huggins of the Old Harlem History Club taught me the political meaning of history. And from the lectures of William Leo Hansberry of Howard University, I learned the philosophical meaning of history. The most valuable lesson I've learned is that when you address a people by their right name, that name must relate to land, history, and culture. All people go back to the geography of their original origin. and identify themselves, no matter where they live on the face of the earth. We have overused the word black because black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. You can call an Italian white, but that don't tell you anything about him. We are the only people who seem to have lost that all essential trait of geographical and historical reference.
Remember, black people are of many different nations. There's not one black nation. We are the remnants, best of stock, surviving of each black nation.
The black and brown royalty and nobility of Great Britain. So, again, 1452, almost 300 years before that, you still have
black men wanted to go to Ethiopia and fight on the side of the Ethiopians, but America would not give them passport and let a single one leave the country for that purpose. And yet, Italians could get passports to go and fight with Italian forces against Ethiopia. Now later, some of the same black men who couldn't get permission got permission to go fight in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in Spain.
I'm a physician.
Physician? And then why would you want to go over in Ethiopia?
Well, I feel it's my duty to give my profession and, if necessary, my life in the cause of Ethiopia.
And I desire and be happy to die for the defense of entire Africa, including Abyssinia.
That's fine. Sign right here on the dotted line.
See, originally, Africans did not define themselves by continent, but more by regions. Africa as a continent began to be defined by foreigners. In North Africa, the Romans had a province called Afrique. The word became Africa. The concept of social order, the concept of an organized society came out of Nile Valley civilization before there was any other society that has been known to man functioning any other place in the world. The significance of Nile Valley civilization is that it was that civilization that set a standard of performance untouched by the other civilizations of the world. And people are reluctant to give an African credit for a creation that happened in Africa. They also forget that the Nile Valley stretches 4,000 miles into the physical body of Africa, and that it was the world's first cultural highway.
For centuries, Eurocentric scholars had rejected the idea that the mighty Egyptian empire was in fact created and maintained by black Africans. The concept that Western civilization was the product of non-white intelligence, imagination, technology, and spirituality was unacceptable, both psychologically and politically. A brilliant Senegalese scholar and scientist would shake, and many say topple, the very foundation of that conventional wisdom. His name was Sheikh Anta Diop. His research was brought to the attention of the English-speaking world through the efforts of his longtime colleague and friend.
I was wondering why his books had never been published in the United States. He said there was no publisher's interest in his books. It took me 7 years to interest the publisher in the books of Sheikh Anta Diop.
Diop's disciples refer to him as the Pharaoh of the Upper Nile.
You must be strong enough and serene enough
de voir les faits historiques
to see the historical facts
et de les interpréter
and
correctement.
to interpret them.
Nous pouvons tous être passionnés,
We can all be impassioned,
mais ce n'est pas de cette manière que nous résoudrons les problèmes complexes de l'humanité.
but that is now not how we will resolve the very complex
Donc cette
problems of
domination dont
humanity.
nous souffrons, dont j'ai souffert moi-même,
The domination that we suffer from, that I have suffered from
notre
myself,
propre domination des autres races l'a précédé.
our domination of other races preceded it.
Donc l'Afrique a exercé un impérialisme continu pendant 4000 ans.
But for 4,000 years, Black Africa had an imperialism. a
Toute l'Asie
period of-
occidentale était conquise et était justement sous la domination noire.
all of Western Asia was under the domination of blacks.
On n'aurait pu jamais penser à cette époque-là que la situation pourrait un jour être renversée.
And at that time, no one would ever have dreamt that the situation could be reversed.
C'est pour ça que l'étude de l'histoire nous redonne la sérénité pour
This is-
apprécier les faits et les relativiser.
This is why the study of history gives us the serenity required to appreciate the facts as they are.
1974, he would challenge the major scholars of the world on the concept of Egypt not being anything other than an African state. In the conference on the peopling of Egypt, leading scholars of the world met and debated Most of them wanted to put Egypt's origin outside of Africa. Sheikh Anta Diop and his protege, Theophile Obenga, placed Egypt within the context of Africa's totality. Sheikh Anta Diop was more than a historian. He's a scientist, he's a paleontologist, and he had proven that if he could get the pigment from some of the mummies, he could prove their African origins. All the rest of the conferees came just to disagree, and when it was all over, they had to admit these two men came prepared to prove their case. At that point, they began to close the door to the research of Sheikh Anta Diop.
We're in a European system. You could come to this university and spend 4 years, go back and spend another 2 for your master's, and another 1 or 2 for your doctorate, and never had any course at all about Africans. But every day you come here, you got courses about Europeans. This is an extension of European culture, European belief, European racism. And it has no intent of teaching about the Africans. The Africans built the Europeans' first university, the University of Salamanca in Spain. These are historical records. 3 black women, Felicita, Perpetua, and Nymphana, were the first to die for Jesus Christ. Next, and they were from what is today called... how
do you know this?
It's in the documents of the church. And it's in the writing of the church. And was it not Pope Melchizedek, the 3 African popes of the Roman Catholic Church, Melchizedek, Victor III, and the other one,
Galatius.
Pope Galatius. Galatius. We have them there. Now, these are church documents. But remember, when there came a time in 1506, after we lost power in Spain, the Africans ruled Spain from 711. We were calling ourselves Moors, M-A-U-E-R-S, then M-O-O-R-S. From 711 until 1485, 774 years, when we built and brought into Europe the university system, building the University of Salamanca, S-A-L-A-M-A-N-C-A in Spain, a copy of the University of Genève from ancient Ghana, which was equally a copy of the University of Sankore in Tombouctou, which the French later called Timbuktu. Now, look, if you want to read it, read Stanley Lane Poole's The Moors in Spain, written in 1887, or Alejandro Macaziza. Read his book in Spanish, The Moors in Spain, and said that even the bath was introduced by those Africans.
You said the bra was introduced by...
The bath was reintroduced because Rome had a bath before, but they stopped because of not understanding the Christian doctrine that the Europeans had embraced. They stopped for over 1,000 years from taking baths. As a matter of fact, I'd like to make mockery of the fact that the Queen Victoria of England boasting of herself being the cleanest woman in all of Europe, taking 1 bath per month. I have books show you where people were made saints for boasting and never even washed their hands. Saints of the church.
This is the Supreme Court in Washington. Now, we can't get into film because they're actually in session. But what I wanted to show you is a frieze which is in the room where the Chief Justices actually sit and dispense justice.
This frieze pays homage to the ideas and principles that have inspired the American legal system. And one of the foundation documents represented in this frieze is the Quran. And in the nation's capital, there are a few other references to Islam, largely unknown, rarely seen. The Thomas Jefferson Building contains the Library of Congress, the oldest cultural institution in Washington, which was completed in the 19th century. Around the dome of the reading room is a mural meant to represent the nations and ideas that contributed most to American civilization. And it might come as a surprise to historians that amongst the ideas represented here is Islam. Beneath this great mural, I'm meeting Congressman Keith Ellison, who I came across at the start of my journey in Minneapolis.
So Keith, tell me about when you took your oath of office, because it was on a copy of the Quran and not just any copy.
Well, in fact, it was on this Quran that we have right here before us. And, you know, in fact, this Quran, which is a 2-volume set, has the initials TJ inscribed right here, Thomas Jefferson. And so, you know, we said this is...
What was your reaction when you found out that one of the founding fathers had his own copy of the Quran?
Rocky, I was gobsmacked.
From the first dynasty to the invasion of Nile Valley, that was the first golden age. And from third dynasty came the great multi-genius Imhotep, the real father of medicine, who lived 1,800 years before the Greek, who's called the father of medicine. When we read the biography of the Greek, he says, I am a child of Imhotep. And from the 18th dynasty came the world's great social reformer and maybe one of the world's first deities, Akhenaten. He thought so much of life he would not crush a flower. He outlawed warfare. Spirituality was a part of the total life of the people. Before the coming of the Europeans, the African was very religious. The step pyramid was originally built with a temple at the top where you can go up and pray. This relates not just to the glorification of a pharaoh, but the spiritual outpouring of a people. This is what made the civilization of the Nile so great.
At the same time that Egypt was in its 24th dynasty, Europe was just emerging from its pre-literate past.
The first show of European intelligence was a book called The Odyssey and the Iliad. That's about 850 BC. Where is Egypt, 850 BC? Egypt is old and tired and has gone through 24 dynasties. It is on the eve of its last great dynasty that will come from the pharaohs in the south. And the Europeans have just written a book of folklore.
Just south of Egypt lies another highly evolved black society, the Nubians. Their civilization thrived for some 3,000 years.
I call the 25th dynasty the one dynasty from the south that moved up north and to tell their cousins, the Egyptians, how to rule a nation one more time. In the great show of history, this was Africa's last walk in the sun. It was a great and mighty walk. That walk had lasted 10,000 years. Now it's coming to an end. Europe is just being born. The very word Europe is not even being used.
the more controversial positions that you take is that black Africans landed in America 2,000 years before Columbus.
I would not specify the day, but probably exceeding 2,000 years. The fact is that Columbus never came to the United States of America or North and South America. He came as close as San Salvador. There's a rumor that says that Columbus came to America. He did not come to America. He came to an island off America. Vespucci came to America, not Columbus. He came to the Caribbeans. But it is commonly stated, just as much as they state that Columbus discovered America while the Indians sat down watching him doing it. Now, but the knowledge of Africans in the Americas quite knowledgeable to scholars. The fact that it's suppressed doesn't have any validity at all.
Let me bounce a couple of things off of you. One thing, this article that I'm going to be referring to our home audience and to our studio audience, this article came out in the September 1981 issue of Science Digest, and it's entitled Black Kings in Ancient America. You and some other black scholars believe that these people, African people, came to this continent before Columbus.
We don't believe, we know.
How do you know? What evidence?
The evidence is there. For example, when you go to Central America, the Yucatan Peninsula, and at Ecuador and places like that, they have caches of Carthaginian money found 200 feet down in the ground, meaning that there were pluvial disruptions and those money was buried. So it indicates a period of time, at least from that, when you look at the strategy, you could tell the period of time in which they've been here. And when you're talking about Carthage, you're talking about at least 212 BC, when Carthage was finally destroyed by the Romans. Again, the Queen Makeda, which you call the Queen of Sheba, there are maps which Rome, the church in Rome, the so-called Holy Father, has suppressed these maps from the time of Justinian, showing South America and what is today called Central America. The maps there, and Victoria, Makeda goes back to at least 892 BC.
Before Christ.
Before the
Let me point out another thing, just from the same article. I don't know if we can see this on television, but here is a picture. Tell me what this is, and why do you see this as proof of the presence of Africans in America before?
That is the head of an Olmec, and the Olmecs were said to be the first of the indigenous Americans. And if an Olmec walked in here, then you would believe that he had come from the middle of Africa. And there is no doubt about it that all of the writers prior to racism admitted that the Olmecs were in fact Africans who had come across here. There is no doubt when Pigafetta and others, the point is that Van Sertima is writing and others, but Leo Weiner in 1938 at Harvard University wrote a 2-volume book for which he was fired about the Africans, Olmecs being Africans.
I have no problem, no doubt. As a matter of fact, speaking about, like Dr. Ben mentioned, and you spoke about Michael Deco, I own a book several years ago and still have it in my possession by Michael Deco himself, who is considered one of America's leading archaeologists and anthropologists from Yale, one of America's most prestigious schools. In his own work, he referred to them as Negroid. And he went further to state the title of the book is America's First Civilization, what you call civilization. And to turn around and to tell these youngsters and other people in America in particular that the black men was the first to build any type of civilization in the Americas will be disturbing to Americans. And so...
Let me ask you this, yes. Even if you're right, let's say you're right, what difference does it make?
It makes a lot of difference.
What kind of difference?
It takes the inferiority complex out of the black man who felt that his only beginning and relationship here in this part of the world is that of slavery. Then it puts him in the driver's seat because, again, they don't tell you that there are man-made hills within the United States. They call them mounds. And they range from in the Midwest all the way down the eastern seacoast of the United States. And they have found artifacts in them that are similar to things found in West Africa and in Egypt, which is Northeast Africa, that predates the arrival of the so-called indigenous Indians to these lands. Another thing is, some years ago, one of the major television networks back in New York, I don't remember exactly which one, ABC or which, had did a documentary, and they said that these Olmecs are the ones who brought right into the Americas about 3000 BC. To tell blacks that they ought to be glad to enter into these schools of higher learning today in order to read and write, because their ancestors back in Africa couldn't read and write. You see what it will do to tell them that they brought right into the Americas? Antonio Pigafetta, that Dr. Ben mentioned, who sailed with Magellan when Magellan came to the so-called New World in 1519, when they landed at the land of Verzin, which we now call Brazil, they were met by people in canoes that carried as many as 40 people. And Antonio Pigafetta recorded that these people were jet black. It seemed that they came out of the infernal marshes. That meant that they were burnt. He said, naked and black as they are, in 1519, 27 years after Columbus's arrival to the so-called New World. Another thing they don't tell you, again, you heard my associate...
Well, why haven't we heard these things before? Why don't we read them in the New York Times, the Birmingham News?
If I stole another man's country, and I brought your ancestors here to work for me, could I tell you how great your ancestors were and still expect to keep you in slavery?
Most black people in Birmingham, Alabama, like in Harlem, New York, are Christians, and they go to in a black community, a black minister, a black congregation, but with a white Jesus, because they didn't know that that Jesus, up until Pope Julius II, had the first black Jesus painted. He had Michelangelo to do it, but up until that time, the world worshipped the black Madonna and Child. The present Pope is going back to Poland to worship at the statue of the black Madonna and Child. That's in the New York Times. But what the Times says the next day, don't worry about the black Madonna and the Child. She was originally white, but there was a storm in the 16th century, passed by and turned it black. But the same storm must have gone to Spain, and then it went to Ethiopia, and it went to the Soviet Union and turned all the black Madonnas black. It was a hell of a storm.
This is Pope Pius XII in his private chapel praying to the black Madonna and Child, and all the popes of Rome in their private, just from the church, the Roman Catholic Church itself. I just got rid of the copy of the history of the black Madonna last night. I brought one copy. It's published by the Roman Catholic Order of Nuns called the Daughters of St. Paul, and they said that the picture of the black Madonna and Child in Poland is reputed to have been painted by St. Luke. Now, St. Luke is said to have been one of Jesus' disciples. He ought to know what Jesus had looked like. So if he painted a black woman and child, who am I to say that he wasn't? Besides that, however, in Anacalypsis...
So now you guys are saying Jesus was black?
We're not saying it. It's what has been written up until the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 325, when Rome, under the order of Constantine, the Roman emperor, ordered the 219 bishops at Nicaea, and they took away Christianity from the Africans. Just remember that before they said Jesus was born in a manger in Bethlehem, They said he was born in a cave in Ethiopia. It was at the Nicene Conference that changed that. Let's go further.
Wait a minute, let me be sure I'm following you now. You're saying that the birth of Christ as we know it is not accurate.
It's a farce. It was only...
You realize what you're saying?
A farce, a lie. You know what a lie is?
A lie is a lie.
The person who wrote that at the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 325 A.D., Constantine, the Roman emperor, ordered a conference be held because Rome wanted to take over Christianity from the people who started it. Christianity was started with Pontius and Boetius in a place called Alexandria in Egypt. And Egypt is in Africa. I saw it up in January the 9th.
I dealt last night the fact that Herodotus, the institutions of higher learning, white institutions, considered the father of history. He himself, when he visited Egypt around 450 BC, almost half a thousand years before Christ, said that the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, the people of cultures, which is part of present-day Turkey, were people of black skin and woolly hair. All right? And so I just want you to understand that the Egyptians we now see are conquerors, just like people who came here and took this land from the Indians, so that they're not indigenous to Africa, those who now rule Egypt. And Egypt is just as much a part of Africa as Birmingham or Alabama is part of the so-called United States.
Let me add this.
Let me just be clear on this. So what you're saying to me now is that the people that we see, Sadat and all those guys, are not true Egyptians?
No.
The fact that
Sadat's mother was a Sudanese, Nasser's mother was a Sudanese, but their fathers were Arab conquerors. The one that was the African was Mohammed Naguib, the first president of Egypt, the one that overthrew Farouk. But 1 year after that, since he was looking for a hookup with the other Nile Valley countries as it used to be in antiquity, he was removed by the Arab conquerors. The Arabs didn't come to Egypt until 640. The first non-African people came to Egypt, otherwise called the Hyksos, in 1675 BC. The Africans there were already in the 13th dynasty period. They had built every pyramid you saw there before. They had done the S-turn in the Nile. They built every one of the major temples that had already been built, including the Grand Lodge of Luxor. The first European to come there did not arrive until the Greeks arrived with Alexander II, the son of Philip of Macedonia.
Look, I'm a college graduate. I never heard all this stuff before.
Because they didn't intend to teach you that. They can't tell you that you're inferior and teach you that you taught Europe. The first Europeans to be civilized by the Africans were the Greeks. When you heard of Homer, the first European to have written anything, you couldn't miss that. They said that Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that was not until 833 BC. The Africans had already in 255,000 at the Tassili Mountain. They had the Sibyllian period, first, second, and third, the pre-dynastic period, all the way up. The Africans had produced men like this, Imhotep, the multi-genius that designed the step pyramid of Saqqara, the first man to be a physician that even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, is giving him credit and call him the god of medicine. The Greeks changed his name from Imhotep to Asclepius. There he is. There he is.
Wait a minute. This gets into what you were saying. So wait a minute. You guys are telling me now that black men taught Homer and...
As a matter of fact,
went to Egypt to school.
As a matter of fact, the Egyptians said Homer was Egyptian, not Greek.
That's right. It's only the Europeans said that. The Westerners now said that he was. But let us go back. Remember that Homer himself said in the Odyssey what? That the gods Zeus and Apollo, Europe's first gods, came from Ethiopia. Go read it. And I didn't write it. He wrote it. Thales, from Thales down to Socrates, and Socrates down to Aristotle, which they call the pre-Socratian philosophers and the post-Socratian philosophers. Each and every one, including Plato, who spent 15 years in Egypt receiving their education.
You're saying Plato was educated in Egypt?
15 years. Before that, you heard nothing of him. Every one of them.
What you'd have me believe then also, for part of what you said last night, is that Plato and these guys went back home, and they were big guys. But they were taught in Egypt? Is that what you said?
They came there
for their education.
And they said it. They didn't hide it. It's the modern writers, the modern instructors and professors who are trying to deny it.
On fire, your metallic ass. You would do well to mind your tongue more.
You told an audience last night that you saw, I think, in a tomb in Egypt.
Yeah.
You saw it with your own two eyes, right?
Yes.
You told me that Moses, there were more than 10 commandments. Moses just took
42. The negative confessions. Moses isn't supposed to have been born until 1349 BC. The Africans were already in the 18th dynastic period. Akhenaten, who died before Moses was born, and Imhotep, who died more than 2,000 years before the birth of Moses, and others at the Grand Lodge of Mem had 42 laws called now the negative confession, one for each nome. They go like this: I have not killed man nor woman. I have not spoken ill of the gods. Moses is supposed to be born in Egypt, they said, at a place called Sukkot. Already, it says that Moses get the 10 Commandments of Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is still in Africa, right? The Sinai Peninsula is a part of Egypt. More so, is it possible for Moses to be born in Egypt, educated in Egypt? At age 85, he's still in Egypt, and he did not learn the negative confessions? Is it possible for you to go to school, born in the United States, go to kindergarten, elementary, junior high school, and college, and never heard of the United States Constitution? Then it would have been impossible for Moses, when everybody had to read the negative confession 5 times a day, for Moses not to have seen those 42 laws and extracted 10 of them, leave 32 more. Now, if you could go to the temple of Setaiwan at Abydos, to go to the tomb of Ramesses VI at the Valley of the Kings, go to the temple of Edfu, where you would, by the way, see the story of an immaculate conception and a virgin birth 4,100 years before the Mary and Jesus story.
As a matter of fact,
wait.
No,
let me understand.
This is shocking.
Let me just put it in form of a question then. I mean, I don't want to stop this, because we're here for information. But what you're trying to get me to believe is that Moses didn't get the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai, but he got them
from his fellow Africans.
Moses was the high priest in Egypt, a high priest of the Egyptians in Egypt. Then what was he teaching? He wasn't a high priest of the Jews.
There were no Jews in those days. They called themselves. Remember now, there was no Israel yet. Israel is not until 1196. And when we to hear of Abraham, Avram as he was called, coming into Egypt, the Africans are already in Egypt, already in their 14th dynastic period when he shows up. All of the pyramids are built. That's another thing. Every one, the 62 pyramids in Egypt were built before the first Jew was born.
Why was he fleeing from the Pharaoh? Information on it's just that they don't emphasize it in the classroom. As a matter of fact, let me back you up when you open up the discourse. We were speaking about Columbus. None of them in here, none of the listening audience, even in the air, has the faintest idea that in the life of Columbus, when after his death, his family had to go to court because charges was raised, and this is in the record in the Vatican, in the secret archives of the Vatican, that Columbus was shown a map of where the Queen of Sheba that Dr. Ben spoke about, this black woman who had mated with Solomon and produced the son, Menelik I, and they lived more than 900 years before the birth of Jesus, had already sailed through what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, came to lands to the west that was longer than Africa and Europe combined, and that, brother, is North, South, and Central America.
May I add this? Right here at this university they teach, and I've just been here a few days, right, a day. They teach in this institution because it's the same as Cornell or anywhere, that Hippocrates was the father of medicine. He's not until 333 BC. Let me read this for you.
Okay, you teach at Cornell, is it?
I teach at Cornell also.
They let you teach this kind of stuff at Cornell?
They teach it now, I'm there.
Okay.
1700, in 1700 BC, that's 1400 years before Hippocrates, you can find the Kahum medical papyrus. Papyrus is paper.
Okay.
A compendium of information about women's diseases and pregnancies. In 1600 BC, that's 1300 years before Hippocrates, the Edward C. Smith Papyrus, a comparative surgical text and anatomical inquiry. It especially deals with the spinal column. 1550, let me jump to one here. The Ebers Papyrus. A medical, there is the whole book on it. A medical paper by Queen Hatshepsut, the first known queen in history, an Egyptian queen. A papyrus designed to show women how to develop a method to stop pregnancy, to insert into the vagina, made of the shrub of acacia and honey, which break down into lactic acid. Not only that, Monsanto, DuPont.
So we're talking about birth control.
Birth control in 1550 BC by the Africans.
It's a long time before the pill.
A few days before the pill.
But keep in mind, however, keep in mind that Europe is not yet in history.
European history. The Greeks ain't alive yet.
All I ask one at a time.
All right.
Okay. Go ahead.
The civilization began. Homer have not written his Iliad and Odyssey. And the hero.
Okay, all the stuff that you're saying we can find this.
Look, I ain't nothing say if it's not here, it's either in Doc's library or mine back in New York. Nothing we take for granted.
For the books that we brought down.
And you said they're not all written by black men?
No.
Anacalypsis
is written, look now. Okay. Anacalypsis is a 2-volume work by Sir Godfrey Higgins, written in 1838 in England and published by Watson Company. The Golden Bow is a 13-volume book by Sir James Fraser, published simultaneously in the United States and England, and it was published in 1938. Bible Myths and the Parallels in Other Religions, written by Thomas W. Downes, and is published in 1887 by Watson Company, London, England. The Ruins of Empire by Concierge Volney is published, there it is. It's published in 1792 by simultaneously in England and France, done by a man who was with Napoleon de Bonaparte.
Let me just say this about that. If we just give you the benefit of the doubt and consider what you're saying to be true, I mean, you are chipping away at everything we've ever been taught, most of what we believe.
But you were taught it as slaves. Nobody.
Slave in 3 pieces?
Yes. We are no longer physical slaves, but we are mental slaves. And this is the worst form of slavery. Some of us believe that the Cadillac and the house on the beach makes us free. But it's the mind that makes us free.
Trying to get at her. Ain't she fine? Watch me work. More.
The society has its origin in the Moorish system. As a matter of fact, the actual outfits that the clan wear. I'm not talking about the ones where you see somebody cut some holes in some sheets, but I'm talking about the real Grandmaster outfits and the ones that's really done up with, you know, with the actual cross and the robe with the cape and the pine cone hat. That's all Egyptian initiation outfits brought up into Europe by the Moors. Okay, in order to do this, we need to understand a little more about the Moors and the concept and that basically what was the divine plan. The Moors are nothing but a consortium of Camite Egyptians. For the people that don't know what Camite means, or Kemet, or Camite, or Egyptian priesthood, mainly the temple of Kom-Ombo in Egypt, or Kemet, the temple of Isis, or Aset, the last temple of Isis, which was one of the last temples to be closed at Philae, as well as other Sufi orders in Arabia that have their origin in what is called Kushite Arabia, in Moorish institutions. And they set up those particular things in those particular societies. So what are some of the sciences that basically the Moors brought? Well, we know of all the learning and all the stuff that the Afrocentric movement told you, all of the stuff that the Moors brought. But let's get into some of the esoteric traditions. Basically, when you go in those New Age stores, and all that stuff that they got in the New Age stores is dealing with, is nothing but all of the stuff that they basically conserved from the Moorish science of all of the stuff that the secret societies had. And when you see all that stuff, they give it a new name. Esoteric teachings, New Age, and all that stuff. All that is nothing but Moorish science that they basically became the custodians of. And now trying to fake as being white in these so-called New Age bookstores, or what they call occult bookstores. You see what I'm saying? That's all that stuff is. Just put a new name on it, and you thinking it's some white people shit. So your tarot cards, you see them, this fortune telling, the tarot, that was introduced by the Moors. From the tarot cards, you get the playing cards, introduced by the Moors. You see what I'm saying? All your divination systems, they got little stuff they throw down, little stones called runes, introduced by the Moors. The crystal ball, this is real deal stuff that works, divination, introduced by the Moors. Your incense, frankincense and myrrh, all that introduced by the Moors. Gunpowder. You thought it was China. It got its root in alchemy. It has its root in alchemy going back to Kemet of the study of metals in and out the body. Also introduced into Europe by the Moors, as well as your fire stick, which later on was a gun that they didn't have no use for. Introduced by Moors. Spiritual music. The word music comes from the word muse. What do you mean they didn't have any use for the fire stick? Well, based on their nature. You know, they didn't conceive of this thing as being a weapon or something they want to kill people with. I guess they figured, you know, white boy picked it up after them and used it. All we know is they invented the gun, the fire stick, and didn't use it. You see, you know, and didn't use it. Music, classical music that we thought was a white, that's the Moors. Brought that up because the scales was invented in Egypt. It comes out of Hermetic science and ultimately out of alchemy. It is melanin put to scale. You're talking about muse? Yes. The word muse is a Greek word for components inside of the melanin. These angelic beings called muse. You get the word music. Something that inspires you. Melanin inspires you. This is all coming from the Hermetic teachings or the teachings of Tahuti. Because Hermes is Tahuti in Egypt, which is the teachings of alchemy, which is the study of melanin, the dark night of the soul. And so music, which is the components of what's heard in the body put to scale, is introduced into Europe by the Moors, classical music. They call Beethoven the Moor of Russia. You see, some stuff called the Greater Key of Solomon, and some stuff called the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is these magical texts introduced into Europe by the Moors. One of the benefits of Moorish teaching was Nostradamus. His teacher was a Moor. There's a movie came out, Orion Pictures Nostradamus, 1994 is when it came out. And thousands of black people that were still up in Russia up until World War II, where your boy, what's the guy from Russia? Stalin, supposed to kill 100 million Russians. How the hell are he going to kill 100 million people? If that's a number, how you gonna kill millions and millions of people, his own citizens, and they don't turn against him? They was doing ethnic cleansing and was killing leftover black Russians.
And they're doing that even now. There's still some
Exactly. What happened was the Khazars, which was a Gnostic Moorish people that settled France. They settled Ireland, and they went on up into Russia and on into Bosnia. And from 1991 to 96, they killed off that black element in Bosnia of the leftover Khazars. The Khazars of these Moors first also settled Ireland. So when they said it, what's his name, ran the snakes out of Ireland, he was running the snake people out of Ireland, St. Patrick's, the Moors. They settled Ireland. The river dance, you see that river dance they doing? The Irish people doing that river dance? That's black. You'll see African tribes will do a dance with their legs are moving and their bodies standing straight, their torso straight. It's the same as the river dance. They found a cross a Celtic cross. So they talk, you hear these white people talking about, see, if you go to the esoteric stores, you hear Celtic, we are the Celtic. Celtic is another damn name for Moors. That's just after the Moors trained these people, they became the Celtics. These were the early people who benefited from Moorish civilization. You see what I'm saying? So Celtic. St. Patrick's Day was put in and was also upheld by the Moors, both in the Irish Catholicism, to cover up the fact of the Moors that was there at that time.
The building of an African world community, the union of African people in different parts of the world, the African population in India and the Pacific Islands, the African population in the Caribbean and Brazil and South America. And I was looking to the fact that we number 1 billion people on the face of the earth. If you put them all together and they did one thing in unison, even if it was wrong, it might alter the world. Africa has always been and still is the world's richest continent. Africa has always had things other people wanted, thought they couldn't do without, and didn't want to pay for. So therefore, there's always been an excuse to invade Africa. Alexander's invasion was the first purely European invasion of Africa. Everything that had happened in Egypt and in Africa before 332 BC was something that no European had anything to do with. Now we see the beginning of European occupation, and we see it as aggression, not bringing civilization, but destroying civilizations that it did not understand.
The uninvited arrival of European armies in the Upper Nile Valley signals the beginning of the end for the highest civilization the world had known. The conquerors, quite literally, changed the complexion of the conquered.
Now you're beginning to get a mulatto-sized population that a whole lot of people keep misinterpreting as white. With each one of these invaders came the bastardization of the population based on the fact that for the sake of pleasure, the foreign soldier heads for the female population at a time the male population has been defeated in war. The Greeks' rule didn't last that long before they were challenged. An ambitious and well-dressed bunch of thugs across the ocean, not very educated, but they could fight like hell, called Romans, began to have ambition for the trade in the Mediterranean.
Carthage, a powerful black state in North Africa, had imperial ambitions of its own. By the 3rd century BC, its forces had crossed the Mediterranean and established a large province in Spain. The military commander of Carthage had apprehensions about his Roman neighbors and warned his son to keep a watchful eye.
Hannibal's father, he would point across the ocean and said, there's some evil people over there. We better bring the war to them before they bring it to us. Hannibal never forget.
Hannibal is only 26 when he takes charge of the army. He launches an audacious military adventure, leading his men and their elephants over the Pyrenees Mountains into France, then pointing them across the Alps, boldly, toward Rome itself. Heavy casualties, overextended supply lines, and defection of allies drive Hannibal off the soil of southern Europe. He retreats back home to Carthage.
The Romans have made a mission, almost a cult, out of the destruction of Carthage. They would meet each other in the mornings, Good morning, Roman citizen. Carthage must be destroyed. Yes, of course, Roman citizen. Carthage must be destroyed.
Rome's legions clash with Hannibal near Zama. His troops are defeated. Hannibal is sent into exile. His once mighty nation becomes another colony of Rome and an administrative center for their empire.
Now, the Roman Empire internally was not very rich. Africa became the breadbasket for the Roman Empire. And except for Africa, the Roman Empire would not have been able to sustain itself. Now, the Roman presence in North Africa is going to force into being one of the great events in human history. Roman taxation, Roman oppression would cause people to turn to new gods and question old gods, to turn to a story about a God who comes forth to rescue them. Now, they would draw from African folklore the story of the child in the manger. Now, what am I saying? Later, in retrospect, he was referred to as Jesus Christ. Now, you can argue about the coloration of Christ if you want to, but I can sell that very quick and we can go on to the next subject. Was he a Roman? The answer is no. Was he a Greek? The answer is still no. These were the only European types in that part of the world at the time. If he was neither Roman or Greek, he was one of those other people. And all of those other people were non-European and non-white. And he came from the other people.
During that time of Roman dominance, Africans hold high military and administrative posts in the empire.
The Romans and the Greeks had no color prejudice comparable to the kind of prejudice we would know later on. Otherwise, why would 3 Africans become emperors of Rome? Why would there be 3 African popes? Finally, Constantine decided to make Christianity the religion of the whole of the Roman Empire. Now we're coming to the critical period when the Roman domination of the church so corrupted the church, the Africans began some disenchantment with the Roman interpretation of Christianity. Constantine calls a council of bishops and priests at a place called Nice. It's the Nicene Conference. It is at this conference that the European created a European concept of Christianity. It was at this conference that they began to take the African saints out of the literature of Christianity. Now the corruption had started. The physical concept of Jesus Christ did not exist. Now, how did it come into existence? Because the Pope commissioned it to come into existence. Michelangelo painted the picture using one of his relatives as model. And that picture, one of the finest pieces of propaganda ever projected in history, has changed the minds of millions of people as who's supposed to represent God, whoever he or she is. And I have no problem with the she. Spirituality is a way of accepting the fact that there is a spiritual force in the universe larger than all of mankind. But someone had to come along and invent a word called God. And someone had to say of another God, and say, mine is better than yours. And someone had to create faith Someone said, I have the true faith. Religion is the organization of spirituality into something that became the handmaiden of conquerors. Nearly all religions were brought to people and imposed on people by conquerors and used as the framework to control their minds. My main point here is that if you are the child of God and God is a part of you, then in your imagination, God's supposed to look like you. And when you accept a picture of the deity assigned to you by another people, you become the spiritual prisoners of that other people. Many Africans became Roman citizens, just like many black Americans today. I have nothing to do with Africa. I'm an American. I'm a citizen. I'm an American. There were Africans way back there with that same kind of split personality silliness, not knowing where their ethnic identity belonged.
Rome's hold over its far-flung provinces weakens. In North Africa, it faces a new and fierce challenge: Islam.
The Arabs, noticing the weakness of the Romans in North Africa, began to court the favor of the Africans.
Arabs convinced the local black populations to join in the struggle against a common oppressor. They also convinced many of them to abandon their traditional beliefs and pledge their allegiance to Allah.
The Africans assumed that by supporting the Arabs would get the Romans literally off their back. They were right. The Arabs did get the Romans off their back, but the Arabs replaced the Romans on their back. And like most conquerors, they declared war on African culture and African ways of life. The Arab has always been a propagator and a defender of slavery. They've always rationalized slavery based on Islam. I do not think any religion sanctions slavery. And anytime you use a religion to sanction slavery, you're misusing that religion and misusing the Word of God. Well, the Christians did it, and the Arabs have done it, and the Hebrews have done it. It's not right in any case.
Islamic armies, their ranks dominated by African converts, defeat the Romans and push on to the continent of Europe. In the process, they capture Spain. There, the Africans and Arabs create a rich, cultured, and powerful empire. So powerful It endures.
Of the Arabs at this time is they have driven the Europeans out of the Mediterranean. The European now must go back into Europe. They have no empires, no great connections outside of Europe. And because of this, they ultimately would go into a period called the Dark Ages. People are confused because when the European mentioned the Dark Ages for him were not the Dark Ages for other people. Concurrent with his Dark Ages, the African had his third golden age.
As Europe suffers, three great kingdoms are emerging in West Africa: Mele, or Mali, Ghana, and Songhai. These were lands of enormous wealth, generated by their control of the trade routes across the Sahara and the abundance of their gold mines. The kingdoms were known for their benevolent governments and their great respect for learning.
For a while in history, there was only two great universities. The University of Sankore at Timbuktu and the University of Salamanca in Spain. And the African was solely in charge of the one at Sankore and part in charge of the one at Salamanca.
When I exposed that Planned Parenthood was nothing new, that it was done in Africa as early as 1550, I was fired on the spot by Professor Ralph Linton. But about 10 years later, the American Medical Association published the Ebers Papyrus. The same thing. In many Bibles, you got about 3,000 versions. And the one that most people here believe in is the King James Version. And when a version is not a fact, a version is something like the original. And James commissioned 47 men under Sir Francis Bacon. He pulled them from Cambridge University, Oxford University, University of Eton, and University of Scotland at Glasgow. Those 47 men wrote God's words.
You're not going to be very popular in this area.
I didn't plan to be. Remember that we did not know that Christianity came from Egypt, and that the first monastery was on the island of Philae, which is still there now, and that the Christianity went into Ethiopia and all of North Africa, where they had 7 patriarchs and 27 bishops before the first one in Greece or Rome. We knew nothing about that. We didn't know. Up to now, you got black people sending missionaries to Africa, not knowing that the Coptic church is older than the Roman church. We still send missionaries. We still tell lies about Africans eating the missionaries. I wish we did eat the missionaries, then we would have had no problem. But we still got that. We still got roots. People thinking that roots has something to do with history when the man says a novel. People naming their children Kente Conte and Conte Kente and all kind of thing now. These people,
you take issue with that? You find something wrong?
Yeah, it's garbage. It has nothing to do with history.
Are you calling
It's a novel.
Roots, the most popular television show in the history
Amos
of
and
this
Andy
country?
was the most popular radio show. And it had nothing to do with black people. It were 2 white Jews. You know, I told you, the worst part of our enslavement is not the shackle on the hand. It's the shackle on the mind. What we have been conditioned. Remember this, that the slave master doesn't train his slave to be free. We once used to train ourselves when we had such things as the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Baptist Church, the African newspaper. Frederick Douglass, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and all these different people had churches where they taught the people their own history. Look, go into our churches and find out, do they sing the spirituals anymore? No, quite a lot of difference. Your behavior.
What difference? What difference?
The behavior of the child. If you tell a child that all his ancestors and all his people before him ever was, and you prove it to him by not showing him anything that his people did, why would he feel good? When you got busing now, everybody been fighting for busing. So the bus goes, you show me one bus bringing one white kid from a white neighborhood into a black neighborhood to study. All the buses go from the black neighborhood to the white neighborhood. Show me a class in music appreciation where they're showing you African music. It is European music alone. Now it has an impact on the child. The problem that we are facing is that, I see you ask what's the difference, okay. In the church tomorrow, they're going to be a church, and every one of the black churches got a white Jesus. Go into a Chinese church and see if you don't see Jesus got slit eye like a Chinese. Go, you know what I mean? Go to everybody but us. Religion is the deification of a culture. And the gods look like the people talking about it. And the angels. Here you got Jesus. Now give me, if you talk about image. December the 25th, coming. You're going to see this, and before. Jesus wrapped with swaddling bands. It says it. Wool. We're in the desert now. It's 110 degrees minimum Fahrenheit. We're in the desert, and the child is wrapped in swaddling band, wool. What mother's going to wrap her child in a wool blanket in the desert? Let's go further. And on the roof of the manger, there is snow. If you give your daughter an icicle and then tell her, take it back and put it in the oven with 110 degrees Fahrenheit and go back to expect to find an icicle, you're going to find running hot water. But that image is in our head. This is a European version that was painted by Michelangelo for Pope Julius II in 1509 in the Sistine Chapel. He finished in 1511. An image, one picture that says worth 1,000 words. Now you have 3 disciples, three wise men in the middle of the desert. One is from Africa. One is black, they said. I mean, how this possible? Moses born in Egypt, and they show him in the book. He said, he was born in Africa. Another one. The angel of the Lord, wait now. The angel of the Lord come to Mary and said to Mary, carry the little boy and hide him among his cousins in Egypt, because Herod wants to kill him, right? She comes and take this child to Africa. Egypt is in Africa. Hid him among his cousin. He's blonde, he's blue-eyed, and he got golden hair. And he's hidden among a bunch of black kids. The army came, the Navy came, everybody searched every house and can't find that boy. Let us go into the theologian library and see the amount of books they have. How many of these people have gone and traveled? See, what I'm saying, there is no major university, major library in Europe I have never been to. There's no major library in Asia or Africa I have never been to. I have been to every one of the major tombs and temples of Egypt and got the pictures and read the hieroglyphs. They discovered everything that they came to, isn't it? They discovered the source of the Nile was the African brought them, showed them the source of the Nile. Africans there having a nice bath, naked. Naked, we were bathing very naked because what we got to hide? We were naked.
But you claim that Africans invented the brassiere.
Yeah, but the fact that they invented the brassiere as a string for the purpose of keeping the breast from jumping up and down. I mean, you know, because it causes young men to burn when they see that. But the thing is, as I was listening to Dr. Ben speaking about the European discovery, I thought about going to the moon, that the Europeans have not changed. Up to today, he still operates that way. Wherever he goes, the first thing he does is plant a flag. When the United States sent men to the moon, they didn't care if there were moon people up there. The first thing they did is put that flag. This belonged to us and the Bible.
And ready to kill for it.
Okay, putting aside charges of reversed racism, you guys are chomping at the beliefs of a lot of black folk. I mean, at dinner, you shook up some people when you said that, talked about black preachers.
Yeah, but let me just ask you this. I mean, let's just say this.
All right.
People believe, unfortunately, most black people here believe that the only religion black people ever had was Christianity or Judaism or Islam. They forget that the first known religion was the worship of Ptah, P-T-A-H, along the Nile. There was no Adam and Eve mentioned any place yet because there was no Judaism, and if there's no Judaism, there's no book of Genesis.
But you went so far as to say that the virgin birth, Adam and Eve, Noah,
were all repetition, and they could read the works of...
You said they're myths.
They're myths. All religion is myths. Religion is based upon belief.
There are people who would bet their lives that Jesus was born.
There are people who are dying to go into cemeteries. But that doesn't make things stop. The way we were taught as if there was no other religion but Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. There were religions, and our religion way older than Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
Let me jump
that the Africans did. The religion of the worship of Olodumare, for example, among the Yoruba, is more than 2,000 years older than Christianity.
All right, let me get to this because I see time is creeping up on us. We were sitting around the dinner table, some students and people, and question came to you both. The way you sound, you guys may not believe in God or something.
I am married to an ex-nun, an ex-Roman Catholic nun. I drive her to church. 35 years we've been married, a few days ago, and I drive her to church on occasion. I'll go in and listen. I'll go to the mosque. I'll go to the Buddhist temple. I go to anybody's religion because religion is a belief. Nobody has it. Now, believe in God. The one thing that they said that they have established a religion to protect the name of Jesus. So read the whole philosophy. Most of the people here in the Bible Belt will cut your throat for being black. Did the Bible stop them from being racist? No. That don't mean a thing because you believe. You believe and your behavior are two different things. And people ask, you believe in God, you don't believe in God. So what that means? It doesn't mean I am not against anyone believing in a God system. To the contrary, I do believe in a God system. God is truth, they said. And truth is a constant effort of research. There is no limit to truth. And one must look constantly to find truth. I've traveled this entire world. I didn't sit one spot and read one book. I went to thousands of libraries over the age. I'm 64, and I've been, from 1938, I have been doing research in the area of African people.
Do you think you've been making any progress, making any difference in people's lives?
Progress is a relative thing. It all depends on what you're equating from what point to where.
Had to some degree institutionalized the practice of African slavery. The Europeans internationalized it. In Europe, the wealth amassed from the slave trade makes the Industrial Revolution possible, while laying the foundations of modern capitalism. In the Americas, the traffic in human souls creates a vast African diaspora, millions upon millions of people ripped from their homelands, transported in chains to a distant, hostile world.
The European came into Africa as a guest. and was treated as a guest. The Africans, unsuspected, political, naive, and some of them still are, because he had nothing against the Europeans and he had never enslaved any Europeans. He just assumed automatically no European would enslave him. He had never dealt with anyone who would enslave the host and the wife who cooked the meal and lie about it. Around 1442, the first slaves would be taken out of West Africa. Spain and Portugal goes to the Pope, the leading arbitrator of that day, the one person in Europe with the greatest authority. The Pope would say to Spain and Portugal, you take the East and you take the West, and you two good Catholic nations start fighting among yourselves. And then the profound statement before departure, you are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people. The slave trade now had been sanctioned, and Europeans had been told they need not feel guilty of it because you're doing this to an infidel who is outside of God's grace. England went into the slave trade with a vengeance, led by Captain Hawkins and the good ship Jesus. The ship was called the good ship Jesus. The coat of arms on the ship was two Africans bound back to back with their arms tied. So they saw no contradiction in being in the slave trade and being Christians at the same time. We cannot deal with this enough because we're still suffering from this inside of the mind of a lot of people in this world, into the millions. We are outside of humanity, outside of the grace of God. That's a terrible feeling as you walk the earth, because what has been taken away is your essential humanity, your human beingness. And when they take away your human beingness, they take away your nationness. Early in the 19th century, the concept of slavery began to yield to the concept of colonialism, a more sophisticated form of slavery. Slavery as a system became unwieldy, and besides, there's a point where it was saturated. Everybody who wanted a slave had one, who could afford one. The European nations of size that did not have any portion of Africa began to grumble. At the Berlin Conference, 1884 and 1885, the European powers of substance who did not have any part of Africa now were given some parts.
Africans did not fall at the feet of the European invaders. They fought fiercely, bravely, and continually.
Anti-colonial wars started up down the coast of West Africa and parts of Inner Africa and in the Congo. There was armed resistance. The Zulu wars lasted from the 1650s when the Boers arrived to the last Zulu war was 1906. In Ghana, the Ashanti wars lasted from early in the 18th century to the last Ashanti war led by a woman, Ye Asantewa, in 1900. For a while, it looked as though the Europeans would not be able to hold on to the continent. More manpower and more ruthless treatment brought it mainly under their control. By 1884, 1885, and afterward, there wasn't no dispute about who was in charge of Africa, just who was in charge of what part of it. We have been hung up with a myth the myth of the conqueror and the invader as the bringer of civilization. No people ever brought civilization to another people at no time and at no place in history. It's one of the most protracted lies we ever listened to. Civilization is the art of being civil. The word civil means being peaceful. And there's nothing peaceful about aggression. Only the slave can abolish slavery. If someone is on your back, you have to bend a little to balance them on your back. Now, the best move if you want to get them off of your back is to stand straight up. There's something about an island, a body of water. It creates a special kind of dreamer, because they did not know where they came from in Africa. They dreamed of the whole of it, bring it all together in one piece.
The seeds of Pan-Africanism, planted in the United States during slavery years, later flourish in the fertile soil of the British West Indies.
Trinidad produced the three greatest Pan-Africanists: H. Sylvester Williams, C.L.R. James, and George Padmore. In Trinidad, they found the Pan-African League. H. Sylvester Williams would eventually call it Pan-African. He would call a conference in London in 1900. A few scattered Africans, a few people from the Caribbean, W. Du Bois from the United States. They did not ask for the independence of African states then. They asked for preparation. Give us the kind of education that will prepare us for eventual independence. They were reasonable, but they weren't listened to. And yet the conference made some kind of impression. After the first Congress, Du Bois would be the leading light from the second through fourth. But the most meaningful, the one that Du Bois called in Paris, as a result of this Congress, Du Bois came to center stage as the leader and theoretician of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism wasn't exactly new because black Americans were practicing it long before someone gave it a name. The African settlement movement, the movement that settled Liberia, was in form of Pan-African movement. The so-called Negro Convention movement was most a discussion of how you bring the African world together. That whole 19th century was Pan-African thought. Prince Hall, his development of the Black Masonic order that he called the African Lodge, the search for a place in Africa for settlement by Martin Delany and Robert Campbell. 1829, David Walker's appeal to the colored people of the world was basically a Pan-African appeal. All of this before we come down to the end of the 19th century. The ultimate Pan-Africanist, of course, was the Jamaican Marcus Garvey.
Citizens of Africa, I greet you in the name of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World. You may ask, what organization is that? It is for me to inform you that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is an organization that seeks to unite into one solid body the 400 million Negroes of the world.
It was soon after the end of World War I, the Secretary of War had told the black American soldiers that their lot would not be appreciably changed by virtue of the fact that they fought in the war. There had been an investigation. It was discovered that many of the nurses wouldn't treat black soldiers in the hospital, wouldn't even touch them. Some of them died as a result. So you have these grievances pent up in the veteran coming home. All of this came to a head in 1919 when there were riots all over the United States. That's called the Red Summer. Marcus Garvey could point out, look, they don't want you here. Let's go back home. Let's go to Africa. Go back to Africa. Let's not only go back to Africa, let's go back in our own ships. Now a whole lot of people who otherwise would not listen, now willing to listen.
We hear the cry of France for the Frenchmen, of Germany for the Germans, of Ireland for the Irish, of Japan for the Japanese. We of the Universal Negro Movement Association are raising the cry of Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad.
He began to dream the great dream and rescue the mind of millions of black Americans from depression and self-doubt. By 1923, he was in some difficulty with the boats and some of the people he had hired to run the boats. Terrible mismanagement and betrayal. He collected millions of dollars from black Americans to buy these boats, and these boats were old and not as seaworthy as he thought they were. Garvey moved over large territory, maybe too fast, and yet he built the largest movement in black America before or since. There needs to be a reassessment of Marcus Garvey and his long-reaching effects. He called attention to what slavery and colonialism had taken away. They took away a concept essential to all the people in the world. They took away the concept of state management and state maintenance. Once you are taken from the geography of your origin and forced to live in a state designed by others, you're still the slave to the man who's astute enough to control a container called the state.
The cannons of World War II were barely cold when Africans met in Manchester, England. They were prepared to claim that container called the state for themselves.
The Pan-African Congress of 1945, now you have the one thing you did not have in the rest of them. You have Caribbean scholars, African-American scholars, not a whole lot, and Africans themselves are now participating. We're not talking about Africa out of the presence of Africa. Now you're talking about Africans with the Africans on the scene. One African being the co-convener of the conference, Kwame Nkrumah. Out of that fifth Pan-African Congress came the mentality, the basic planning to rule and to take over a nation. The others were saying, give us the education. At the fifth Pan-African Congress, they said, we got the education, we got the manpower, we want to rule now.
The people of Ghana resisted British rule from the very beginning. In March of 1957, they become the first Africans to win their freedom. Kwame Nkrumah was ready to rule.
When I knew Nkrumah in the Harlem History Club days, my impression of him was not as the future head of state, but as an African who's going to go back and make a major contribution to his nation, and he was a committed African. I went to Africa in 1958 because I've been promising myself I was going to get to Africa next year. That promise of myself went on for about 5 years before I actually got there. When I got there, all I had was a return ticket. I told an African who had read one of my stories in an African magazine and wrote and got my address. I said I was coming to Ghana, get me a place in a hotel for a few days, and he didn't even go to a hotel, he didn't even try. He took me to the slums of Accra, and I lived right there with him. Finally, a check that was due me from America did not arrive. When it did arrive, it bounced. So there I was, and one day, Nkrumah had gone someplace. He's coming home from a visit of state. A whole lot of people along the highway hailing his return, and so I was along with the rest of them. I was just like another African melted into the crowd. And he spotted me, and they stopped the Rolls Royce, and the motorcycle drivers pulled out guns, thought that someone was about to hurt the president, you know. his motorcade stopped, and he came out and said, "What the hell are you doing in my country?" And I just laughed. You say, "You're a long way from Harlem." He looked right and said, "Where do you live?" I said, in Jamestown. Jamestown is the slums of Accra. Still is. He shook his head and said, "You sure must love Africa." Finally, he headed back to his car, and he turned back to me. He said, "You know what I'm going to do for you?" I told him I didn't have any job, and my check had bounced. I didn't even know how I was going to get home. "I'm going to put your Harlem behind to work." And he gave me a job. Working on his newspaper, the Evening News. The significance of Ghana's independence at that time is that it gave spirit to the whole of the African world. It was a major impact on Black America because it came at the time the civil rights movement was reaching a crescendo, a great height. His first vision of Pan-Africanism was the physical unification of Africa. And he said that Ghanaian freedom won't mean anything until the rest of Africa is free. So the spirit of Ghanaian independence would create a light of hope in the rest of Africa. And this is what Kwame Nkrumah was trying to build. This is what the intelligence services of the United States, England, and France had to destroy to keep the example of Ghana from emerging.
Coins behind us. Who's backing you? Puppy? Silence more. Understand the game more. More. On your back more.
pity's sake. Mine is a sentence of death. No, Robin, he's a Moor.
Curse on Moors and Saracens. Not for their ungodly ways, Master Robin would never have left. What manner of name is Hazini? Irish? Cornish?
Moorish.
Found in the 1800s. Before they even knew. Whenever they found this stela, they didn't even know Akhenaten existed. But they found it in Oklahoma. That's documented in Ice, the Ultimate Disaster by Richard Noon in his book. Because they couldn't get it. And the black man just looking at it. There's a stela of Akhenaten found in Oklahoma in the night. This stela of hieroglyphics of Akhenaten hymns in the 1800s in Oklahoma. As well as they found a group of Egyptians, Native American speaking, Egyptian speaking and writing ancient Kemetic language over here in Maine. All documented in Richard Noon's book, Ice, the Ultimate Disaster, 5/5/2000, which is reprinted. And he happens to be a Mason, giving us some of this particular information. But the Rosicrucians say that the capstone of the Great Pyramid is the granite that is made of the capstone of the Great Pyramid can only be found one place on the earth, Stone Mountain, Georgia. Which means that Confederate picture that you see on Stone Mountain, Georgia, if anybody ever saw the picture of Stone Mountain, Georgia, where they got Raleigh and all these Confederate things, that's not by accident. Because that particular mountain is an ancient relic that coincides with the pyramid. As well as the Rosa Pyramid also say that the white man was an experiment that went bad by the black man. The Rosicrucians say that. The Rosicrucians, because a lot of your Yahoo theory documents of the creation of the white man was taken up into Europe by the Moors. And the Rosicrucians are the ones that became the custodians of those particular documents. Rudolf Steiner, who was Adolf Hitler's teacher, who was later on run out of Germany by Adolf Hitler, and years later all his manuscripts and stuff that he had made broken heart because of this stuff. And they later on had to go and get all of his particular information, and they got it by a series of lectures that he put on, and they got all these particular books. But there's about 20-something books, the one book that you can't find, you got to get it from Health Research, is the one on Atlantis and Lemuria, where he talks about this God took a germ and created a new race of people. Just like Elijah Muhammad said in his theology of time, that they took a germ and created a new race of people. Elijah Muhammad said in the message to the black man that the moon was separated from the earth. And so Rudolf Steiner in his book Atlantis and Lemuria. Rudolf Steiner's book Atlantis and Lemuria talking about the creation of the white boy. He was contemporary with H.G. Wells. So H.G. Wells wrote the novel part of this story, and that's where you get your Island of Dr. Moreau from, which is now represented in a movie in 1996, starring the master of their actors, Marlon Brando playing Yahoo. You see. But also Yahoo Kirk was also a Hyksos god. Translated in Donald B. Redwood's book, Egypt, Canaan, and Israel, and also in a book called Bright. The guy's last name is Bright, The History of Israel. The history of Israel. So the Rosicrucians is the ones that became a custodian of a lot of the Moorish documents also. Also too. The Moors set up Europe as a result to fulfill prophecy of this vision of a new land called America, which we would come and become slaves, which is a part of the alchemical process. Now let me explain this. Slavery, although how hideous it was, is prophecy being fulfilled. Give you two examples. The Jason and the Argonauts, the story, is also about a slave ship. The text coming out of Samaria called Inanna's Descent. Inanna is nothing but the goddess Isis or Aset. And she has to descend into the underworld, which is also descend into the deeper aspect of her own spirit. And the descending of that spirit, she's a royal person. And she has to strip off all of her royal garments, her royal history, and become nothing. And literally die to become a new divine goddess of the universe. So in so many words, in the process of alchemy, and alchemy is the royal art of chemics. So when you go see the movie Excalibur, Merlin, the word Merlin is Moorland, which is the Moor. Merlin is talking to one of King Arthur's sisters. She said, I can see just like you, I'm a seer. He said, do you know the royal art? The royal art is alchemy. And alchemy is the study of melanin. A part of the royal art is putrefaction, illumination through putrefaction. Putrefaction means to rot, to die, to disintegrate, to degrade, degenerate, and from the degeneration of future species becomes new life. The phoenix rises from the ashes. So a process of slavery is a process of alchemy. After all, alchemy is taking an original substance and making something new out of it. And that's what happened to the slaves. We were originally Africans, and we were made into a new people. And as a result, like it or not, we are the ones who brought forth the ancient knowledge on the planet in the modern time. Not the Africans, although we have a few African contributors. It's mainly an American phenomenon. The Afrocentric movement. You see what I'm saying? The Afrocentric movement. In the movie Highlander, they talk about the Highlander, which is Scotland. It's supposed to be this immortal being. And he said, you can't die, which is also talking about us, because we can't die. We die, our souls don't die. He said, are you supposed to reincarnate, are you supposed to be immortal until the last days? He said, until there's a land that's not established yet. This is more science. And in that land, we will have a gathering. When there's only a few of us left, we will have a gathering. And in that gathering, we will fight for the prize. The gathering that they're talking about is this whole conscious movement that came about, that we've been going through, and we're going through as we speak right now. All these minds gathering together to get the prize, the final solution. So so you'll find that in Highlander 1, Highlander 1, but get all three movies. The Ouija board was produced by also a form of that particular divination system produced by the Moors. All your Hermetic science, your Kabbalah, all forms of alchemy, the Grail mythology, forms of Gnosticism, which is esoteric Christianity, all forms of Sufism. Suf means woody-headed one. Also, in Ernest Scott's book, he said that the Moors traveled up into Europe to introduce alchemy to the Europeans to try to somehow make a non-aberrant man. Now what does aberrant mean? The word aberrant means abnormal, unusual, and unnatural. So they traveled to Europe somehow to make a non-abnormal man. That's in Ernest Scott's book, People of the Secret. You see. And they did this by trying to use alchemy. They failed, but that's what happened. You'll also find out about the Tamaru that I was talking about in Diop's book, African Origins of Civilization, Myth, and Reality. It's just he left out the part of the part on where there are actually created white people, that statement. But Champollion, when he translated hieroglyphics, wrote back to Champollion the Elder and gave him this particular information about this Tamaru person. And he was really upset when he found the origins of what his people and how the Egyptians viewed his people as being these abnormal people. You see. But there's even news that even Champollion didn't even translate the hieroglyphics. They had some black man over there that translated them.
of Pope St. Peter, the first Pope of Roman Catholicism, as the church admits.
But this man has a black face.
Black face, black everything.
If you strip him, he's black all the way down except his fingernails and all those things like that.
Well, how do I know you just didn't get a picture and paint a black face on it?
No, that is the statue in Rome. That you're looking at now.
Right now at the
Take a jet.
Can't afford
Take the fastest means and go to Rome and come back. Right and then tell us if it's not. That same picture, I used to teach at Roman Catholic
College.
Colleges.
This is there now?
Yes, now.
With
and
every
pope kisses his feet. Every pope kisses his toe. They said his toes are worn by the thousand kisses placed there. Peter, the man that they told you, every black minister, every white minister says, Jesus gives Peter the keys to some black saints. St. Augustine, some of you say that St. Augustine, St. John Chrysostom, St. Athanasius, and St. Ambrose. Black saints of the church. You have to remember that Christianity is called in Europe and by Europeans as the new religion. Right. It was alien to Europe. Emperor Constantine is the one who decided to take it. He said, I need a religion to unify my empire. With this religion, I could then conquer the world. And he himself was never a Christian until on his dying bed in the year 337 when he became converted to Christianity. But he took it to unify his empire.
But isn't it Augustine, in his unchristian doctrines, he wrote 48 different works. The three most noted in the West is his Confessions, which he specified who he was, and then the Holy City of God, and the last was on Christian doctrines, the fundamental principles for modern Christianity.